the history of a company and seen, the growth process, observed it either from an outsider or, as an insider. So that's good.
So I'm very conflicted, Anjali, whether I'm an outsider or an insider.
You can be half in and half out also.
That's exactly what I do when I switch sides as per my convenience. Hi, Sandeep.
Sandeep, you're on mute.
Yeah. No, I said I wanted to thank Anjali for making it and always grateful for all her support.
You keep conning me into doing all these things which you've been doing for the last 10 years now.
Thank you so much.
That's Sandeep. That's Sandeep, Anjali.
Yes.
No, Vardhaman's been very kind to us here. Before we started Vastu also, I think putting our entire structure together and doing a lot of stuff. I get her to do all kinds of stuff for us. So she's been very, very kind. She built Cerebrus with Anita. Oh, I think 25 years, ma'am.
Right.
She only does what she enjoys.
Yeah, that's good.
We're waiting for the other panelists, and then we should be good to start.
Vaijayanti is to join, right?
Yes.
So, Sandeep, I'm at Palghar.
What happened?
Nothing.
All okay?
That is Friday is my Palghar day, right? And
wow.
So last 2
days.
The hospital. The hospital, right.
Oh, fantastic.
So I was just telling Shefali, I'm sitting in the director's room in the hospital, and I was looking at which is the good background to have.
So I'm in Kerala at home. Okay, I have to come for a couple of days.
Okay. How's your dad?
Okay, going on. Better actually.
So Vaijayanti is here as well.
Hi. Hi, Harper.
Hi, Vaijayanti.
Hi, Shefali. Hi.
Thank you for joining in, and I'll actually then kick us off with a brief introduction about what we're planning to do here and what the objective is. So this is our first webinar under the Power of She series, with the idea that we acknowledge HFCs and NBFCs see much lower participation of women in the labor force. And how do we create a shareable knowledge base that we can collaborate on with peer group companies to come up with strategies that are effective to move the needle on the participation. So before we even start, a big thank you, Anjali and Vaijayanti. It means so much for you, for us, that you guys came here and joined us in the first webinar. And I'd also really like to thank Vardha ma'am, who's joining us as our third panelist today, and especially Sandeep, because any DEI initiative can only be successful with leadership support. And so to have him here today, I'll pass the mic on to him to address the audience, but it really means a lot, Sandeep. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I think, Shefali, wonderful of you to put all of this together, and really grateful to Vaijayanti and Anjali and Vardha ma'am, of course, for being there. And I think we have come a reasonable way to get to doing some of these things as a 6-year-old company. So I'm really glad. And I think over the last 1 year, I think since Shefali has taken over, we've done a lot of wonderful stuff in some of these areas. But I guess we're just scratching the surface. One of the things that we've done reasonably okay, I guess, is the Unchi Udan program for women entrepreneurs, and that's something that has taken off. But I guess one of the things that we need to do, and I don't know how to address this in the smaller companies, in the smaller towns, and where we actually exist, to get women to speak out, engage, and not get stressed out by the ecosystem of men around them, if I were to say so, and not get intimidated and get anxious, is a very important aspect, because many of them work incredibly hard, but there is somebody who cut paste the email, copies the email, forwards it, and many of these things do happen when I go to branches, when I speak to people. Okay, so whether it is the silent people in our customer service team or the collections team and a lot of other places, I think acknowledging and rewarding and respecting what people actually do and promoting that is very important. I think that's one thing that I would say. Once again, I think thank you so much, Anjali, Vajanti, and Vardha ma'am, for being there.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you so much. And very rightfully said, I think among the topics that we addressed today, one of the key points is that when we start moving into deeper markets in India, how do we continue to maintain that level of participation by women in the workforce, especially in HFCs, and what lessons Vastu can take from there. So I'd like to kickstart with an open-ended question for all of the panelists and just shed some light on some basic data that we put together. So we surveyed around 25 to 30 peer group companies unofficially and identified that the median percentage of female participation is at about 8%, which is alarmingly low. If you, on the flip side, look at banks, you're looking at upwards of 25-30% participation of women. And oftentimes we are in the same kind of markets, right? So really the first question to all of you would be, what do you think is so specific in the HFC NBFC space that we are not seeing that same level of participation? And the other side of the coin is, what are the changes that banks have brought in over the years that you're seeing far more participation there? So Vajanti, maybe you could kick us off with this question.
All right. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Shefali. Thank you, Sandeep, for inviting me for the session. I always look forward to these conversations because you very rightly said, Sandeep, we've just about scratched the surface, right? So while Shefali quotes a lot of statistics that banks are at 25 to 30%, and, of course, we are also in a similar range, but there is really a long way to go. One of our learnings, of course, has been that some of the issues or some of the factors that come in the way of increasing women participation in the workforce are, of course, structural, they are societal also. So, the more community outreach, and maybe that becomes more important as you go deeper into tier 3, tier 4 towns, and you look at hiring women maybe from those markets. I think an overall community outreach is important because, when a woman engages in the workforce, right, there are a lot of people who are involved in that decision. It's not. And that is the reason one of our principles in DNI is that we have to first tackle equity before you can even talk about equality. Everyone's backstory is really very different. And since we are, of course, talking about women here, there are a lot of expectations, right? And there are no role models. So if I have to look up to somebody and model my own career on, where are they? Right? So I think those are some of the things that we need to work on. I'll say community building role models. And third, of course, to your point, Sandeep, where you said that women sometimes don't lack the confidence or, don't know whom to reach out to, how to reach out to. I think men actually play a very important role. So in many of the things that we try to do where I work is see if we can get advocacy from men. Because otherwise, we are only preaching to the choir and we are in our own, echo chamber and nothing will really move. So, these are some of the thoughts at the top of my mind. But having said that, look, I think in retail lending, it is a challenge. It's not unique only to HFCs. If you look around, even in banks, within banks, you will find a huge representation ratio in certain teams, and then relatively lower representation ratios in certain teams, particularly say on the asset side. It is there. So, and the other point related to this is that women themselves are deselecting themselves from a sales career. And that is in fact one of the things that we are very keen on working is how do we get more women in sales? Because that's how you will have higher women representation. I mean, these are some of the opening thoughts in my head. I can just go on and on, but I will stop here.
Thank you, Vajanti. Anjali, would you like to chip in as well?
Hi, good morning. I'm Anjali, and thank you, Shefali. Thank you, Sandeep, and all the people from Vastu Housing. It's been a company that I have been looking at quite closely for the past 6 years. It's been a very interesting journey as an outsider to see how the company has been. It's not just about looking at the financials of the company, but just seeing the passion of the leadership team over these past 6 years. And that's really what's extremely encouraging. I think the power of she is what really binds us all today on this platform. Now, as both of you all mentioned, anecdotal evidence suggests that we actually have a rising women workforce. I mean, when you look at the services sector, particularly, whether you're looking at IT, professional services, the BFSI space, we are seeing more women in the workspace than what we did about 20 years ago when, I had joined in about 25 years ago. But what really is befuddling is that India's reported female participation is really the concerning point. Because at a macro level, the female participation has fallen from a peak of 32% in 2005 to 19% in 2021. Now, and this is a phase when India has definitely seen rapid economic growth. So what is going wrong? Either the statistics are not capturing sufficient amount of data, or we seriously have a problem, because ultimately economic growth will be compromised if we don't use the cohort of our women workforce. But be that as it may, I think statistics tends to hide a lot of the essentials. So most of us came out to say, we thought the BFSI sector was doing fairly well on diversity. And diversity at this point in time, I'm just referring to female participation in the workforce. We all have numbers pretty much in the same broad range of saying anywhere between 22 to 24, 25%. But when Shefali, you did a very, very interesting study, because you broke that down into more granular data. And when you stratify that, I myself was quite surprised to see that you came up with a number saying it's just around 8% from your sample that you looked at. That is really the telling part, that there is a lot of data that we are not really cognizant of, despite all our progress that we have seen. But I am not disappointed. I think our way forward is right. There is a lot more attention on this subject today than there was in any other time in history. I don't think we need to be looking at diversity ratios as targets, because that ticks the box on your ESG, but it doesn't really change the way the thought process works within the organization. I think we all need to recognize that. What does diversity bring to the table? Are you able to tap into a different type of talent pool? Is there a different thought process? What do you gain? Is there a better people connect when you have diversity? Are people willing to accept different points of views because you have diversity? And does it really help organizations prioritize empathy as well? So I think when you look at all these, at the initial stage, the diversity ratios look fairly in line. I mean, you don't see at the entry point, whether you're looking at education level or at the entry point of the workforce, it's not bad. It's the middle point where people drop off the ladder. And that's when diversity needs to focus on retention strategies. That is the job of the HR, to really look and seeing what can we do to reduce our attrition rates. Because when you reduce attrition rates, there's an economic benefit to the company because there are lower costs on training. And that's where I'll just leave the thoughts. So you need to look at diversity with retention. Both of them move hand by hand. Thank you.
That's so true, because a lot of times what we see is you'll see on the entry level absorbs a great deal of participation. I think somewhere I was reading that that could be as high as 40% even in recent hiring. But then when you start looking at leadership roles across geographies, that suddenly drops off to such a small number. It begs some research to really dig in and see what is driving that drop off in the sector, not just in India, but globally. I would like to take this moment actually, since Vajanti, you also touched upon women in sales. So we have Rupali here on the call with us, who's a sales leader at Vastu. She's a regional head and also looks after collections, which is a very unconventional role to see female talent in. So Rupali, if you'd like to share your thoughts, that would be wonderful. Hey, Rupali, can you hear us?
Yeah, I heard you. In fact, I went on. Actually, I'm planning just a second.
Sure.
What my thought on this is, the woman has the capacity, capability, everything. But the problem is,
Hey, Rupali, we can't hear you properly. I think you can log in again if required or something
Hear me?
later. Yeah, now I think it is better. I think if you give a background, you've done this for 19, 20 years.
Hello.
Yeah, Rupali, I think we can hear you slightly better now.
Rupali, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, hi Rupali, go ahead.
Yeah. My experience, I've been dealing with most of the women because I believed in appointing women and ensuring they perform. Women have the capacities, capabilities, everything. But the fact is they need an opportunity and a space. My experience says I was given a space, maternity, everything happened when I was working, and that space helped me to grow. There was once we think of hiring a woman, we need to think on those emotional and those aspects also, so that they take their time and they come into the organization and they feel this is theirs. We care for them, and then they'll start contributing. This is my personal experience with all the women team which I have hired, and they have really stayed for a long time.
So Rupali, I think it will be interesting to share for a minute how Grow Finance supported you through the entire journey. You worked there for 19 years. And I think it's refreshing. I think you even sacrificed maternity early and all. One of your old bosses once told me.
Yeah. Yes, I did sacrifice because it was not my sacrifice. The company, it was a two-way process, basically. The company cared for me, so I thought it was my responsibility that I gave back. It was not that I have sacrificed for the company. I'm very clear on that. And it was a very small sacrifice which I have made for whatever the company or the management has given me over the period of time. So that is okay. That is a life which I selected to live, and I don't consider it as a sacrifice at all. But then how Gru helped me. I'll be very upfront. I was pregnant immediately after I joined. And then being any other company, it would have been a shock, because immediately going on a leave, I think I was on probation and I wanted to go for a maternity leave, but then that was a conscious decision which I made, that I will not take a leave more than 1 month. And when my MD came to know about it, he said, Rupali, when you are in this organization, let us take this decision. You are not going to take. We understand your point, but then that was very courteous on his part to say that. But then morally, I thought I need not have to go, because they accepted me, my condition. They accepted my leave. They made it sure that I'm comfortable, the type of work I am doing. Though I was going for recovery, though I was doing for collection, they ensured that there is no much stress. So that was there. So I came back after a month. Other things which I think was supported was sometimes it happens that you have to go home early because the child is not well, or when the baby is growing up, there's nobody to assist. There was no question asked. Why am I coming late, or why I am going home early? And so it did come to me naturally that since the company is giving me so much, I need to reciprocate in the same way. And so I thought, even if I'm spending 6 hours in the office, I need to give my 200% to the company. So that loyalty came from there. This is what, and in every stage, I think being a woman, they supported that, yes, I'm capable. In fact, there were a few things wherein I was not ready to accept a position, considering the family situation, the distance and everything. But then I was forced. I think Ms. Vaijanti had touched on this subject, that the men has to support a woman if she has to come up in life. And my seniors have supported. And they saw that spark and they said, no, Rupali, you can do it. Whatever required, we are there to help you. And they always stood by. It was very comfortable environment. That is also very much important for a woman to work. It should be comfortable. I still remember in the board, there were 16 of us together. I was the only woman in the management role. And it was a very strict instructions given not to use any such language which is going to directly or indirectly affect Rupali. We should consider that she is there. They never went for any outing or anything just because they'll have to take me and I am being a woman. Every time everybody used to say, "Is bar acha perform hua, I will go to Goa." No, Rupali is there, we can go to somewhere else. So that also they considered. So it was like a two-way process, and somewhere I also in the journey, they never made me feel like I'm a woman, so I am somewhere less competent, or I will not be able to give that time. But they, in fact, it is upon us also now, that how do we reciprocate to their willingness to open channels for us.
Absolutely, Rupali. And I think this ties in very well with what we've been discussing so far, that in order to be able to retain the female talent, the kind of infrastructure support and allyship that is required in the workplaces is very critical. And that also introduces a nice, neat segue into the next topic that we wanted to touch upon, which is the efficacy of DEI programs and how can we improve them. So formal DEI programs are really something that are a more recent phenomena driven by investor interest and also general awareness improving. But there is always this fine line, how do you make sure that something that you're doing is not plain optics and it is actually also driving impact? So Varda ma'am, if you could start off with some of your thoughts on this topic, and we can then move to the other panelists as well.
Right. So Shefali, I strongly believe that instead of looking at numbers, one needs to look at the culture and focus on, also the performance of the individual. So in many organizations, when we look at DEI, we talk about the number or the percentage of people that are there. I always have found that in the banking industry or the banking sector, you do have larger percentage of women across levels. So if you look at the cooperative banks, some of the cooperative banks would have a 60%, 70% women in their workforce. And the other thing is, I think banks were always considered by the society as a safe place to work for women. So when we look at the DEI initiatives and we look at it being not just for the ESG's sake, I think the leadership commitment and creating a work environment is very, very essential. And the supportive environment where the leaders, the men, also feel the need for it. And the DEI initiatives encourage the women to have, as Rupali said, to have the ambition and desire to take on the role is very, very important.
Absolutely. And I feel like one of the data points that we were discussing about yesterday while prepping for this webinar was that HDFC has an astounding retention ratio when it comes to their workforce, with people with a significant proportion being there for more than 15 years. So Anjali, how have you seen from a culture perspective what is done at HDFC? How has that promoted allyship and a better work environment for women?
Thanks, Shefali. So I think we are all pretty much on the same platform, where Vardha really summarized it well to say, ultimately, it's about the culture of the place. So yes, at HDFC, as I mentioned, no, I should have mentioned that our attrition rates have been very low. And now we have a 45-year history with us, So our attrition rates have been very low. And when we look at our pie of our employees, 33% had a tenure of more than 10 years of service now. So I guess people stay in a company if they feel they're valued, if they feel that they're treated well. Now, every time we talk about DEI and every time we talk about issues, motherhood is something that women cannot get away from. But as an employee, as a woman, you are an employee first and then consider your gender. Leave has to be need-based. Whether it is for a man or a woman, it's the idea of leave is it's always going to be need-based. And the people you work with will appreciate when you need leave, provided you don't take advantage of that situation. That is the basic thing. So whether we want to keep categorizing different types of leave across different types of employees, I think the way forward is really to say that you have your leave. The maternity leave is a completely different aspect to it. And thank goodness for the government's good sense to give us 6 months now. A lot of us had done it in, I don't know why they had those 87 days that were there earlier. But the 6 months definitely helps. Now, in the smaller organizations, a lot of them say there are difficulties. If you have, let's say, 2 women in your department and you're a department of 4, somebody will throw their hands up and say 50% of my staff is not there for the full year. But it's not the case with every company. You will take these examples of, one time or twice women will be, pregnant in their career spans of 30 years. So I think using that as an excuse doesn't hold any longer in this day and age. When HDFC started, we were the pioneers of housing finance in India. We didn't have any role model to emulate. So a lot of it was learning by doing. It wasn't as if DEI was really on our radar, but we definitely recognized, and fortunately, we had management that believed in this concept of an open door policy, which means you cut off your layers of hierarchy, you allow people to provide their feedback, and it's very, very important, especially in a customer-oriented business. Because if you don't hear what the front customers are telling your frontline and you're not able to relay that to the people who are making the policies, you can't offer good quality customer service. And the other thing, especially in a people-oriented business, is that if the way you treat your people is the way they will treat your customers. And an absolute rule is that a disgruntled employee cannot provide good customer service. So a lot of what we did in HDFC really came about building a culture. The DEI culture now is about making people feel appreciated about the work they do, and having a system that is perceived by a majority of employees as being transparent and fair. So when people feel that they are not too often discriminated, they will be more willing to be patient and grow with the company.
Thanks, Anjali. And that's kind of what we were speaking about earlier, Vaijayanti, when you said equity has to be the preface to equality, right? So everyone needs to feel that they're being treated fairly and equally before you can start stemming any kind of big change. Vaijayanti, Axis Bank's Come As You Are campaign is one of the most prominent DEI campaigns that you've seen recently. And I would really like to hear your thoughts on the second part of the initial question, which is how do we balance out between optics and impact when we're running successful DEI programs?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, actually. So, we'll talk about Come As You Are in a bit, but, when we look at DE and I think there are three different things, right? So there's diversity, which is more about ratios, representation, cut them by region, cut them by this metric, cut them by that. So there's a bunch of metrics. Inclusion is really all about culture. So do everybody feel a sense of belonging, right? Do you have a singular leadership prototype, or are you more a leadership ecosystem where different kinds of people can actually thrive? So inclusion actually touches upon all people. That includes men, right? I mean, traditionally, many organizations have had this very extroverted, assertive leadership style as being the leadership style. But you see, in real life, actually, several different kinds of people are successful. And do you have an ecosystem? So that's around inclusion, which is more about the culture piece that Vardha spoke about. Equity is actually both mindset and policy. And I do want to say, in a very large institution, if you're driving change, each of these elements play a role. There's a role that policy making also can play. And I'll tell you why I'm saying so, right? And there is a role around culture, the work around evangelization, having conversations with people, on the importance of why we are doing what we are doing, right? Because most people view themselves as being fairly rational, objective human beings. And here, if you go around telling them, is there an inherent bias in what you're doing? You can imagine the reaction that you may get from the other side, right? So when it comes to, for example, policy making, and why is it also important, is if you take the case of women, and Rupali spoke about it briefly, but our entire premise on the way we look at women, and I'm here now only talking about women as a marker, is we look at women as people with ambition, right? So our policy making is not just guided by them as being people on a life stage event, right? Because life stage happens to men also, whereas men get married, men become parents, right? So our whole, and this is what we found, that when women left us, small percentage did leave us for families, life stage events, but many more left because maybe they got passed over for a promotion, they didn't get the increment that they wanted, exactly the same reasons that men tell you. And therefore, in your policy making, whenever you're looking at promotions, you're looking at ratings, you're looking at all the typical things that HR does, you got to nudge and make sure that there is equity there, right? There is equal access. See, it's equality of access before equality of outcomes. And that's what policy making can do. So we shouldn't underestimate that. Secondly, optics, okay. Sometimes we can drag optics to the extreme and then it only becomes about events and optics. But in a large organization or in a large industry, when you're signaling change, optics play the role of signaling. It signals to people suddenly that this is important, right? I mean, look at Women's Day, these celebrations. Of course, if you're restricted to becoming a one-off event, an annual event, and you don't follow it through with any concrete programs, I mean, that's not great. But it has a role to play because it's an opportunity for you to reevaluate, cast a path and go forward on that. So, that's my take. I think all pillars are important. Culture is important, super important. Policy making is also very important. Creating the nudges is very important. And building allyship. I think without that, we won't go really very far.
Yeah, that's so well summarized, Vaijayanti. Thank you so much. And I think one of the challenges with some of the DEI programs that we run is they are too hyper focused on just the women, but much lesser focused on getting the men culturally aligned as well, and hearing them out and understanding their reservations in a lot of the policies that are being run. In a similar breath, we do have great maternity leave policy, but most places paternity is something that's not paid much attention to, in which case we are inherently saying that the responsibility lies on one parent over the other. So that was very interesting, and these are things that all companies should definitely pay attention to. And then I think one of the other pieces that I wanted to touch upon is also why suddenly we're having so many DEI programs and discussions, right? Which is that there is a very concerted investor push that is happening, whether you're looking at the PRI guidelines or just the global push towards ESG in all investment metrics. Anjali, one of your roles at HDFC is also managing the ESG strategy. So I'd love to hear from you how you're seeing investor response to some of these DEI programs, and then how do we actually report these things better and measure them better?
Thanks, Shefali. At the end of the day, there's a lot of literature, there's a lot of jargon on ESG, but having spent sufficient amount of time, and we have at HDFC about 68% of our shareholders are overseas shareholders. A large group of them are really mandated today to have ESG as their core factors that they consider before making these investments. But to me, ESG is nothing but a simple narrative of what one does each day at work. For a long time, companies were evaluated based on their financial parameters, but increasingly so, we are looking at non-financial parameters to give investors a more holistic view of the company. And that's where the ESG narrative comes in. Increasingly, your non-financial parameters are almost balancing and being as important as your financial parameters that you have. ESG has to be imbibed across functions in an organization. It's good to have a chief sustainability officer perched up over there, but that's not the way it works. Everyone holds one small piece of the puzzle across the entire organization. But let me just come back to the importance that you said about DEI. One of the good things that SEBI has done is the framework on the business responsibility and sustainability report. Now, unlike a lot of the ESG reports that you're seeing, this report is shorn of all the glamour. There are no glossy pictures. There are no bombastic statements of every company saying, I follow all good practices. My culture is great, and I have meritocracy in every system. It is hardcore numbers that are there. And FY23 onwards, it's compulsory for the top 1,000 companies by market cap. But over a period of time, this is going to spread out to more and more companies. The good thing is, within the next 2 years, Shefali, mark my words, we will have a very good set of data coming across a number of industries that will be able to do a good peer-to-peer comparison, because we are all using the same kind of formulae over there. So the BRSR lays a lot of emphasis on the diversity ratios, and not just diversity in terms of your female participation. It's what you're doing on persons with disabilities, what you're doing with, within your internal policies, your willingness to be transparent about putting these policies out. But here's an uncomfortable question that we all need to address, and it is going to get reflected because it's part of the BRSR reporting, is gender pay gap. And let's be very honest, gender pay gap exists. When you look at the overall India numbers, they say, and this is ILO statistics, that they say that the gender pay gap in India is 27%, which means women earn 73% of what men do for the same job. And the fact is, right across all organizations, you do see a gender pay gap. That bias, whether it is conscious or unconscious, is there. And the good thing about having data out is that companies who are transparent will stratify this data. They won't just take a median and say, this is male, this is female, we have more senior male, and therefore the ratios are skewed. They will be willing to put out this data. More importantly, is that companies should increasingly allow themselves to be subject to a gender pay gap audit. because that is what is going to change the needle. A lot of times we are saying women don't negotiate, women are hesitant to talk about money. We've heard this narrative for a very, very long time. But the transparency of reporting is going to be a game changer in a few days. And obviously, companies that are willing to be more progressive will use some sort of a third-party validation to see this. It's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to admit this, but this is something that we really need to raise our voice on. As if we have women platforms, we really need to raise our voice to say, let's get that data out. Because a lot of time when you're talking about pay, there isn't full transparency and disclosure on that. But as HR professionals, you all are the ones who are really going to be able to carry this mantle forward.
Yeah, and I think that uniformity of data will truly be a game changer. You're right, because currently everyone does have creative methods to present their own information, whether they like to admit it or not. On gender pay gap specifically, Vardha ma'am, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You've worked across so many different organizations and even on things like comp benchmarking. What are some of the trends that you've seen over the past decade or so in terms of is it getting better, or are we're still in the same situation?
So I would say that, at a certain level, if one were to compare like to like, apple to apple, even in large corporations, I would definitely see a 5 to 10% gap, right? One aspect is that women don't negotiate. During increment times, they will complain and they will crib, but they will not go directly and ask for what it is. They might complain, crib, and switch jobs. So the reality is that there is a gap. Typically a woman operates from a sense of insecurity, in the sense that she fears losing her job. But the good thing is, in the last 5 to 7 years, with both government as well as the company focusing a lot on equality, I do see the younger generation being a lot more vocal and expressive in terms of what they want. So I do see a shift, but if I were to do a payroll comparison, I am very confident that the gap would be there. It would be as low as 5%, and which could be explained by performance differential, to a 25-30%, which could be explained to the fact that today nobody says it, but maybe 10 years back it was very often that you are the second breadwinner, you're not the only breadwinner. Many times for women, that was a comment which I have heard, which was very often said, that you are the second breadwinner. But having said all of this, Shefali, I think amongst our listeners are many employees, and I think there are both male employees and women employees. There are young management trainees who have logged in and listening to it. And I have one message to say, and I would love to hear Vaijayanti and Anjali, Rupali talk about it, because they've also, achieved a certain success in their career. The difference between I will and I should. Let's say 10 years back, 15 years back, I don't think we had all the support mechanism or all the noises on policies and the government support. And we've had many women who've reached the leadership role. And I think they have focused on, I want to do or I will do it, rather than I should be having it. And I strongly believe that as women, if we decide that I want to do something, nobody can come in our way, we achieve it. We've heard Rupali saying that I was the only woman among the men team. And I think Vaijayanti, I know, has been, I think I know her for 30 years, and she must have been the only woman in many startup organizations also. And I'm sure so would have been the case with Anjali. So, what is your message? So I'm picking up, Shefali, from you. What's the message we should give to our listeners today? What do you think about that?
Anjali, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, one good thing is things are changing. You've got to also have, everything is not doom and gloom, that sometimes we tend to, move on. I think most of the time when we talk about these platforms, you either hear the super achievers and the so-called super women smashing the glass ceiling. That's one cohort, or you hear the absolute strugglers. But the real thing is, you, me, we are all in this middle range where we are plodders across our careers. But the thing is, work in a place where you feel comfortable, safe, and happy, because we are spending most of our working hours over here. I think this is where it comes back to individual building a culture where you can have a free flow of exchanges with each other. Not every organization has the same kind of culture. It's not able to replicate one set of culture. A lot of times, no point having policies and policies if it doesn't translate into action on the ground. But most of the time, I think we get past a lot of things is when you just encourage an environment of sharing and encourage an environment of helping each other, rather than, people tend to work in silos, and they tend to work in silos when they're insecure about their jobs. But ultimately, especially when you look at a housing loan, from end to end, it is not one person doing it. And unless that communication right across from the sales right down to the last leg of the recovery, or the last time, the customer is paying their EMI, that's, the flow of communication between people in an organization is really important. I think being able to work with people is important. A lot of times it's egos come in the way, but having that culture, the tone at the top matters a lot. So at the end of the day, just be a little easy on yourself. You've got the workforce is changing. Requirements of Gen Z are changing. HR has to move with the times as well. And at the end of the day, prioritizing home and work is something that you have to learn to do. It comes with experience over time. But whatever it is, the only lesson that my 25 years has given me is that always have a backup, both for the home front and at the workplace. And you never know what goes out of whack when, but as long as you have a team that can help you take over your job when you're not there, whether it's at the home front or at the work front, I think most of the time we get through, our lives. Be a little easy, be a little happy about coming to work. That is the most important part about, being able to have a long career. And, there will be blips that will come and go, but at the end of the day, raise your voice, don't internalize it. You don't have to be confrontational, but put issues early in the time, when you have these kind of issues. Just one last thing is, on the POSH has been one of the best things that has come about. One always hopes one doesn't have complaints over there, but just besides having a POSH committee, have those little support groups across your branches to be able to talk about issues, because very often interventions can take place before they need to be raised at a POSH level. So, things are moving probably in the right direction. We'll get more data coming through. We have to keep our voices loud and clear about what we want as well. So I'll end over there. There's really no rocket science in all of this.
Absolutely. And Vaijayanti, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Okay, so I mean, it's a journey of 30 long years doing something, staying in motion. In fact, one of our programs is exactly that, the Access Women in Motion. And I won't go into the details, but I think that, what can I say? See, one thing is just own your space, okay? Create room for yourself. I think that's what I learned. And second is ask for help. You don't have to struggle. So, if you're struggling at home or sometimes you're struggling at the workplace, we tend to not really ask for help. We think asking for help is a sign of weakness. People think that I'm not doing that well or whatever. But actually, when you reach out to people, people just reciprocate. Yes, I learned the hard way. So do ask for help. Thirdly, periodically keep challenging yourself and try to do new things all the time, because when you're building a career, right? So one way, whether it's a man or a woman, career traditionally has been, like a vertical step, one ladder, one rung of the ladder, then the next, then the next. But you got to keep reinventing, right? How movie stars reinvent themselves periodically, from being romantic heroes, now they become action heroes in their late 50s. So it is like that. You got to keep challenging and don't shy away. It's okay. I mean, you suddenly, nobody really judges you. And beyond a point, like I said, just own your space. This is what you are, and this is what you will be. And what I must say that, I agree with you that, it has never been I ought to do. I just decided I will do. And I did it. And I don't know, in the way that maybe we look at our life, instead of looking at it from the lens of, oh, have to surmount these 3-4 obstacles, just think about how can I just, either scoot over them or bypass them, like that. So a little bit more solution-oriented focus, asking for help, owning your space, and keep challenging yourself, because that's how you will run a marathon. We're not here really running a sprint. We have 30-40 years of career, and today we're living so long. What are we to do? So we got to keep reinventing. So I think that's really the message from my side. I don't know if it is gender specific. I guess this equally applies to anybody, irrespective of gender or sexual orientation or people with disability. It really doesn't matter.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think both that feedback would be great for all our attendees today. So don't internalize issues, own your space, raise your hand. And I think what I have seen at Vastu specifically, where we're also seeing a lot of young female talent, is that they're a lot more forthcoming. They're a lot more objective in assessing situations rather than internalizing them. And I'm increasingly seeing more of them be very, very vocal about what they need and what they want. And it's really heartwarming to see that shift over the past 7 years in this organization. And so I think with that, we only have a few minutes left. So I want to save a little bit of time to see if we have questions from the audience. We have received some at sign up that I'll just quickly go over now. But aside from that, attendees, if anybody has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. So Vajanti, Anjali, Varda ma'am, I'll let you decide who wants to pick a question, because there's a pretty wide range here. One of the questions has come from a female manager who's asking, how can I promote work-life balance and flexibility within my team, especially for team members who have family responsibilities? So which one of you would like to?
Shall I go first?
Please do. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So number one, the fact that you acknowledge that you need to do this work for your team members, I think that itself is a starting point, right? See, as managers, one of our responsibilities is to be very mindful and very sensitive to the needs of your team members. So if you realize there is a challenge here, then the answers can come, and there can be many different road to Rome, like they say, right? I mean, from my thing, one of my learnings has been that if you are super organized, you end up organizing everybody's life around you. If you spring surprises, change priorities all the time, actually it results in a lot of weekend work, and it leads to a lot of demotivation. So even when, let's say this is the JFM famous quarter, last week of this financial year, but we're not running a 24-hour sales cycle. We are running 2-3 month long sales cycles. So getting into more organized performance planning just ensures that we are not scurrying around last minute. These are typical stuff that causes imbalances in life. And the third thing is, to each person, work-life balance means different things.
Yeah.
And decoding that for each person is actually our nuance as a manager. For me, it could mean, don't disturb me on Saturday from 8 o'clock till 2 p.m. because I have some stuff to do. For somebody, it could mean, don't call me before 9 o'clock because I go to the gym and I'm not going to carry my mobile phone with me. So being sensitive to what it means for different people, these are some of the tips I can give. But I'm just saying, thank you for acknowledging the problem. From there on, all solutions will emerge.
I think, yeah, that's a great place, right, where we are already recognizing that this needs to be spoken about. Anjali, maybe you can take this next question. It comes from one of our younger team members, a management trainee. The question is, what are some specific strategies that women can use to build networks and seek mentors in the industry to help them advance their careers? I think this also ties in a little bit to, how there are certain personality traits that we perceive of women being shy or reserved or so on and so forth. So what would be some specific advice for young women in the industry?
I get what you're saying, because I've also honestly found one-on-one, I'm great with people. In a crowd, I'm a mess. And I'll be very honest with you. I will tell you what happened to me, a very embarrassing situation when it happened to me. So this was the first time I was sent overseas for a conference. This was a housing finance conference. And I was told, go network because you'll be able to, take the HDFC experience overseas and all that. And I decided, it was just before, it was a very grand, big banquet. And I said, let me go a little earlier. And I took my business card with me and I walked up to the first gentleman I saw, confidently put my hand out and said, I'm Anjali Tarapur from HDFC India. And the guy turned around and told me, yes, my dear, I'm the waiter. Can I help you? That was my first networking. And I could have wanted to just sink into the ground. He was in a suit and he was well dressed, but he was, and I was like, where do I go from here? Then I kind of crawled back into my shell. Now, 25 years later, I can laugh about it. Networking is not always easy, but there are different ways of doing it today. Sometimes you see some people effortlessly move through a crowd. Sometimes you have to work at it. Sometimes it may work. Sometimes people may not want to have a conversation with you. It's fine. Have a little bit of a thick skin sometimes. But fortunately today, the social media allows you a much wider group, but eventually you will find like-minded people with you, and that's the path. I mean, you don't have to have 5,000 people on your LinkedIn and you don't have to have thousands of likes over there. It's just about finding people you can resonate with, and you don't need very, very large numbers. You just need one or two people who can be your champion going forward. Sorry, I know I don't have an answer to it, but we are all still struggling. A lot of us struggle, but we don't want to really say, yeah, networking is hard in that big hall. Why do you see the boys club exists? Yes, it does. But we have to live with whatever we have and make the best of it. There are other ways of working around things.
Absolutely. And I do think that sometimes we take networking to mean numbers when it's really about how deep those connections are that you form. If in every phase of your life you have one leader who's championing you and looking out for you, I think that in itself is a big, big win. You don't really need to have 20, 30 people cheering you on. Obviously, family support plays a big, big role in that as well, because they're really the people who you need as your cheerleaders in the stand. But thank you so much, Anjali. There is a very interesting question that has come up right now in the chat, which is about sharing a pivotal power moment, quote unquote, when you knew that you had superseded this limitation of being a woman leader, and you knew that this was that, in a way that gender bias did not apply to you as much anymore. And I'd love to hear from all of you on this question. Balda ma'am, maybe you could start us out with this one.
So I think when I started working as a welfare officer. So I was posted at the plant of Orson Electronics, and I was in charge of the labor union. Okay. And the reason why I was in charge was there were 50% of the workers were women and 50% were men. And 22 years young. And I still remember the trade union leaders would come and constantly complain to me about the condition of the toilet and the condition of the batata vada or the canteen. I was actually, there came a day when I got very frustrated, because how long can you hear about the complaints about the toilet, the passage, the canteen food, etc. So one day, in sheer anger, I said, okay, I got up and I walked to the men's, because it was complained about the men's toilet not being clean. And I remember going across and opening the men's loo during break time. I don't know who was most embarrassed, because I was in my, in the mood of solving the issue. So all agitated and all, let me go and have a look. And the speed in which I opened the door, in the equal speed it was closed, because obviously people were in action. And I think that day I realized that my entire equation with the union changed. Because, the complaints became lesser and we became good friends. And I realized then that, if somebody comes and complains, I have to get headlong into solutioning rather than waiting for men to come and solve the issue. And that's when it just disappeared that I'm a woman and I have to deal with situation. I cannot deal with the situation.
That
Deserve a standing applause for something like this. Seriously, it is a game changer in this entire conversation we've had for an hour.
Absolutely. That was an amazing, amazing story, ma'am. And I'd love to hear more of it when you're back in office.
Looking back, I laugh about it and I'm also equally embarrassed. But at that moment, I didn't feel I was doing anything wrong. And I think if the situations come today, I will perhaps do it a little more peacefully, but I will still walk into the men's loo to solve the issue.
Thank you so much for sharing that, ma'am. Vajanti, any specific such moment in your life? I think we're doing embarrassing stories now too.
No, I don't have such a fantastic story, but I'll tell you that for me, I don't know, like as a person, there was a year, and from there on, really, I started making pretty decent money, if I may say so, through bonuses and whatever. And for me, that was a breakout moment. Like I said, wow, with this, I've really arrived. I don't need to, and I have never asked anybody for spending on me for anything. But that was, oh my goodness, I can really do stuff, right? And, I really felt so happy and delighted, and it didn't matter, and I understood actually that, many people think women don't look at money or they are second bread earners or what. I realized that it matters to me and it makes me feel very happy. So it's not such an interesting story, but for me, that was it. Like, okay, now I can do some great stuff. I can do stuff for my family. I can make it count. I think for me, that was a great moment.
Yeah, and that is a pivotal moment, I think, in all of our careers, right? Where you realize that, oh, now I am truly financially independent and I can truly go and do, what I want and chase after it. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I do see we've run over time, but if we could just do one last question before we wrap up, if it's okay with you all. There is a question by a male colleague asking, how do we promote allyship within ourselves to support the advancement of women? And I'm so touched to see this question coming in from one of our team members. But if we could sort of summarize our thoughts and answer this question as we wrap up. Vajanti, maybe you could start us off.
Well, I think so. I genuinely think that we need more men as advocates. We need men as allies. Otherwise, we just end up preaching to the choir. So see the fact that you want to work in this area and contribute, right? I think is the first starting step. What is it that you can do? So I'm saying in simple things, right? In how you're communicating to your people, to your colleagues, to your management. Is your communication only a one type? Are you able to get across to all kinds of people? In your decision making, are there more voices that you're willing to hear? I think that is very important. Thirdly, in the way that you give access to good projects to your people, are you making sure that, you're not going to the same 3 people every time, right? Because, many times it's about giving equality of access, which should take precedence over equality of outcomes. So, you have a great project or you have a great territory which you want to develop and really build out your business, then make a conscious effort to see that you have really looked at a very wide slate of people and that you're not reaching out to the same set of people all the time. So these are, some of the things that you can do. And of course, partner and raise your hand to your HR team or to whoever is doing this and become a person who evangelizes this across the organization, right? And just make it your own personal story. I think that's all I can say.
Yeah, and this also ties in very, very well with something we spoke about yesterday, Vajanti, that there are biases even in setting out targets, right? And how do you, one of the easiest way to promote allyship is making sure that you're very conscious of these decisions when you're making them. So thank you so much for sharing that. Anjali, your thoughts on how male colleagues can promote allyship in the organization?
No, I think a lot of it really is just being a bit conscious about what happens between the workspace and the home space. You right away know that you have a better boss when somebody is more cognizant of what happens on one's home front as well as what happens, at the workspace. I couldn't have been happier at a time, especially during COVID, when my boss said, gosh, my wife's going to fire me if I don't cut the onions right now, So, there was this cognizant that, yes, you need to balance out 2 things, at the same time. I'd love to hear my male colleagues saying the baby was crying all night long. So, it's nice to know that sometimes, there is a little more sharing that happens. A lot of it is just casual conversation that you have with your colleagues. It doesn't have to be about work all the time. And the very fact that you've put this question on the table, I think you're doing exactly that. So I just leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Vardha ma'am?
So, I agree with what Vaijayanti and Anjali are saying. It is the small things that matter. And it is the casual conversation which we have while having tea that makes a difference in terms of being perceived as an ally to the women colleague members. Many a time, I may sound like a feminist with a paternalistic, feudal, traditional mindset. We do tend to make comments which perhaps demonstrate our gender bias. And we need to be very conscious and very alert to it. I love this ad where the brother is telling the sister, you cannot go out because it is late in the night and the road is not safe. And the mother says, right, you cannot go out because it is because of boys like you that the road is not safe. Right? So I think we now need to be very conscious of the comments and observations that we make. And these are casual ones, not in the board meeting, not in review meetings, but over a cup of tea in the canteen while walking in the corridor. Are we passing a judgment?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think increasingly, doing trainings on unconscious bias, on addressing gender biases in the workplace, or even some of, the generic language that is a little more, that promotes bias, but even women don't recognize it. I think those are some very important things to take into account. So I think with that we come to the close of our very first webinar. I realized that this was probably this has been a pretty crazy experience for us who organized it. So I want to first really thank Anjali and Vaijayanti for being so patient with us as we tried to sort out all of the logistics for today. Varda ma'am, thank you so much for jumping in last minute and always being such a big support to us. And as a follow-up audience, what we are going to do is we're going to publish a white paper summarizing some of the thoughts that we went over today and some of the research that we did leading up to this this webinar today. And our aim is going to be to do increasingly more frequent webinars. This is not a Women's Day initiative. This is a more sustained long-term initiative, and use that to really drive some sort of change and dialogue around how we can all do better as organizations in the BFSI space. So Varda ma'am, Anjali, Vaijayanti, thank you so much once again for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Shefali. Thanks, Sandeep. Bye. And
Thank
thank you everyone who's given us a patient hearing. Bye.
Thank you everyone. Sincerely
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice weekend ahead of you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yay, we're done. All right. Let's
Well, Shefali, you're